Welcome into the Husker 24/7 HoopsCast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson. After a game in which Nebraska held a ranked opponent to just 49 points, under 30% shooting, and yet the Huskers were not victorious. Brian, we've seen some ugly basketball in Pinnacle Bank Arena before. We saw a really ugly stretch at one point with UCLA earlier this year, even in 2025. But last night's Michigan-Nebraska game was one of the biggest rock fights I have ever seen in person, including a Cincinnati-Nebraska double overtime special where neither team got to 60 points. So, what were your thoughts from press row last night? Tough loss for Nebraska. Felt like they really gave up a big opportunity in front of them.
I decided to embrace it about 10 minutes in, looking up at the board, seeing that Brice was the only one for Nebraska who had dented the score sheet. I was thinking, I'm just going to get behind this, because it was on both sides. So at least you had that. You had like this competitiveness where both sides were like trying to chop down the tree, and it wasn't going too well, and they were expending a lot of energy doing so. But it's a frustrating loss, no doubt, for Nebraska because they were 13-1 in games, actually, I think, where they'd held teams to 70 or less. And here you hold them to under 50 and do a heck of a job, actually, on Danny Wolf. And he ended up with 10, although he did score 5 big ones in a stretch there that kind of hurt him. But defensively, you can't complain. It was like everything they talked about all week about that, having that type of energy and that juice there and giving a full 40 there. But it was just frustrating. How many shots just like around the rim were missed again? And I know Michigan had a strong 5 presence guarding the rim and they shrunk the floor. Nonetheless, like there was a play where Andrew Morgan got fouled and it should have been an and one. Didn't finish it. Ends up missing
Didn't make
both
the free throws.
Yeah. Well, you had a 1-4 trip there for over a stretch. Barricade was 0 of 10, Jawan 2 of 13, and it just felt like Jawan was just, I mean, obviously the stats tell you he's off, but it felt like some of these shots weren't close. And so that was where it was very difficult to watch.
Yeah, it was frustrating because we've seen Nebraska have their issues inside, and they've been able to survive that for the most part when they go through stretches in games where they just can't score at the basket. But last night, there's so many moments that come to mind. Like Raleigh Wooster makes a really nice move, sets himself up for a right-handed layup, puts it off of the glass so hard that he almost airballed it off of the glass. Like it just, their lack of touch around the rim really came to bite them. It felt like Braxton Mia could have had an and one a couple different times, or at least a basket. He made his 2 free throws, which, that's if you're looking for a story there, Brian, maybe you just figure out how Braxton Mia has become one of the best free throw shooters on the team since he's just cashing his opportunities over and over now since the start of the month. But they had opportunity after opportunity. And then the other thing that just hurts, and we'll dissect this entire thing, I think, at least once, if not twice on this podcast, they got so many open looks. They had all kinds of open looks from beyond 3. And Brice made several early, and then Nebraska finished, I think, with 6 total. And Brice made 4, and Hoiberg made the other 2.
Yeah.
I mean, like, in the Maryland game, I felt like Connor Essegian really hurt Nebraska because he couldn't give you anything. The Michigan game, and obviously he took the last big shot with the 3, not the last shot, but the last big one, down 1, wide open there on the wing. That's why Connor Essegian's here. That's why Connor Essegian's in college basketball, is to be able to make 3-pointers. And when you can't get a single 3 from your best 3-point shooter, it's really hard to win. And I think it's sometimes just as simple as that. I mean, they just haven't gotten enough from Connor Essegian at points this year, and really, really hurt him last night.
It was an all or nothing game in a way because it was a rock fight that now this morning and throughout the rest of the week, it's just tough to sit on. And it's, it's easy to shoot arrows at it for good reason. And yet, if they had cashed in that last bucket in the final 10 seconds, if Brice takes it to the hoop and scores, or if Connor does hit that shot, it would have been like one of those, like, man, that was a bizarre and ugly game, but it kind of memorable in a way.
Yeah.
Had they pulled that thing out, like, it would have kind of you felt like put the cement down on, like, they're going to get into the tournament, and they won it in this bizarre, like, 47-45 kind of way. And it had that opportunity to take whatever the narrative that's going to surround for the next 4 or 5 days, maybe the rest of the season, and you could have really squeezed it in a different way, and we would have almost looked at it in sort of with grudging respect and, like, appreciation for, like, man, that was a weird game, but they won it, and it would be game like 3 years from now on a podcast, we'd still be we'd bring it up kind of randomly, so
The
that's
Michigan
where.
Rock Fight game.
Yeah, that's where the opportunity, like, we still do remember a double overtime game against Cincy where they didn't get to 60, and this would have been in that category, except times 10 because of like what it would have done for their season. And so that's where, I guess, this morning I feel really bummed out about it, because they did play well enough on one end of the floor to give them the opportunity to have that. And for all this team's flaws, it could have been like sort of this game we highlight, and instead it's now you feel like, man, they can't slip up at home the rest of the way, and so the margin for error has gone out the window, and that's where it's disappointing when everybody else goes 5. Sam Hoiberg hit his 2 shots. Brice was 9 of 21, and everybody else was 5 of 39 or 40. So, I mean, it's just tough to unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, that's as ugly of a performance as you can imagine. And then they have to kind of, like, it's one of those rare times where you wish that you were playing a game a lot sooner than they don't play until Saturday. And that game on Saturday is going to be really important. You got a Minnesota team that had been playing pretty well. They just lost to Penn State, which is something that Nebraska and Minnesota can commiserate about when they get together on Saturday. But that game is monumentally important. And one of the things that a win against Michigan would have done is it would have given you a little bit of breathing room. Nebraska's lost 2 straight games, 2 straight opportunities to give themselves a bit of breathing room here at the end of the year. And now it's very much you have to win. And it's no longer, all right, well, if you just grab a couple games at the end of you're now at the end of the season. It's time to grab those games. It's time to stack wins. Their metrics are good. All they have to do is add wins to it, and they are in on a soft bubble. And so the opportunity is right in front of them, and they have to figure out how to get that win against Minnesota. And I think that Brice Williams can play really well, but it's who's going to step up around him. Can Nebraska play good enough defense against Garcia? Can Nebraska finish this game if they get a lead? Can they finish the game? Can Nebraska prevent themselves from falling in a double-digit hole? I mean, one of the things they did in this game against Michigan is that they were able to make sure that it never got too far out. There was that one stretch where it got to 6 points, I think was the biggest lead that Michigan had at any point in that contest. And, of course, that came right after Nebraska fought to get the lead back. You go up by 2, and then what was it? Wolf hits the 3-pointer that ends up giving Michigan a lead that they would never relinquish. So it's it's a difficult thing for Nebraska, but they're going to have to flush this and turn around and go beat Minnesota, and they're going to have to play a lot better than they did on Monday night. And I have confidence that they can do it, but it's starting to get, I'm starting to wane a little bit. The 4-game winning streak brought me back in like it did everybody else. But the last few games, it just feels like they're just tripping over themselves in critical situations, and their margin for error is almost none.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough to get a bye, and you're in danger if you don't play well at the end. I mean, first off, you got to win the Minnesota and Iowa games for the NCAA tournament cause. I understand that. But also the Big Ten standings are so tight. Like, Minnesota and Iowa are a game behind Nebraska. That's it. Like, Nebraska is that close to like the 14-15 seed at this point if you don't play well Saturday. And so, I mean, there's a lot on the line besides just the bubble. Obviously, that's the biggest one. But with the loss, I worry that they won't be able to get that bye in the Big Ten tournament. And they could have a pressure-packed game in Indianapolis where you are, well, who knows what the seeds are going to work out, but you're like the 11 seed playing the 14, seed. And
Which
people are
could be
going to,
Penn State, or it could be,
yeah,
a
exactly.
USC team that you've struggled with already.
Yeah, and I think about that stuff too much because first things first, if you don't take care of the next two at home, none of that matters, and you're not going to be in the tournament anyway. But nonetheless, there's going to be some pressure, I think, now going to Indianapolis to play well there when we get to that point too, because of games like last night. So it was an interesting game and strategy wise too. I felt like Nebraska lost the game in the stretch you brought up, where Wolf hits the three, another kid from Michigan hit it. Michigan only hit 5 3-pointers all game, but they hit 2 in that like 90-second stretch where it went from a 39-37 lead for Nebraska to 45-39 Michigan, and 6 points. I said it in my article, it felt like 16. Maybe that's a little much, but at 6 points felt like 10 or 11 in this game, as was scoring at a premium. And then Nebraska battled back, and they had 2 possessions where I felt like they could have. I know Michigan was trying really hard to take away Brice, but it ended up with Berke shooting a 3 and Raleigh shooting a 3, like in a stretch, like within the last 3 or 4 minutes, when there were these empty trips that we obviously are going to talk or think about the last minute or the last 10 seconds of the game. But I think just as much about those trips where they got nothing really valuable going on offense, and you ended up with 2 guys not confident taking shots that are out of their comfort zone. And those trips felt like really like a problem when they happened to me. And if you had gotten one of those, maybe you end up on the right side of things.
Felt like there was too many low IQ basketball moments last night where, and I understand he was excited to be back playing after having missed several games, but how many times did Berke get the ball and just try to back somebody down, wasting 10 seconds of your shot clock and then having to force a shot late because you got to get something up? Like it felt odd what they were attempting to do sometimes. And a lot of that is a credit to Michigan. It's just like, we're going to pack in. You're not going to be able to drive on us. You're not going to get your backdoor cuts. We're not going to give you easy baskets. And Nebraska couldn't shoot them out of it. They couldn't force them to come to them. And they took a bunch of threes. But, I don't know how many people expected Berke to take 10 shots in his first game back. I mean, that's a guy that I don't know that I want taking 10 shots if he hadn't missed a game. And so it's a tough deal, but when you're shooting as poorly as they were last night and you can't get to the hoop, and when you do get to the hoop, you aren't finishing, at some point you just have to chuck it up and hope that it goes in. The incredible part to me is that you couldn't get a 3 from Connor Essegian. You couldn't get a 3 from Jawan Gary. Like, you just didn't have someone capable of stepping up to help you in that situation. And Brice had to put that team on his back. He only had 8 points in the second half. Michigan did a nice job taking it away from him. I think 2 of those points came from the free throw line. He wasn't able to get to the line much, which I think is a challenge for Nebraska. They shoot a ton of free throws. They rely on getting to the line. They did a good job in the second half, piling up fouls early on Michigan, but then they couldn't add to that to actually get free throws and steal points for free at the charity stripe. So a lot just didn't work for Nebraska yesterday, and they're going to have to figure out how to battle through this. I mean, they're in a stretch right now where they haven't looked good offensively really since the Maryland loss. I mean, they looked fine in that game against Maryland, Connor Essegian aside, but against Northwestern, it was a struggle offensively. Against Penn State, it was a struggle offensively. Against Michigan, it was a struggle offensively. It makes you wonder if they've hit a bit of a wall, which is a scary thing with still 4 really critical games left if you count the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I thought Dusty May opened the door for Nebraska to steal it. I don't like when coaches do this, when I understand fouling up 3. I get that.
Yep.
But he did it with
Fouling
12
before. Yeah, I didn't either.
12
I
seconds
didn't get
left.
that.
And I was like, well, that's a gift because you put
Yeah.
Brice to the line, and suddenly that puts all the pressure on you to like hit one. You're not in the double bonus yet or even close to it. And it worked out perfectly for Nebraska because Brice, who's your clutch guy at the line, hits 2. So you're like, all right, we're within 1 with 12 seconds left. And then Michigan gives you the opening. And then I know you were strong with your opinion. Brice should have taken it. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I was at in the moment. And that's how obviously I feel after the fact when the season missed it. What did Hoiberg say about that whole sequence?
It was quick. It was the first question he was asked. He said, we had the best shooter on our team with an open look for 3. And that was it. I understand that. I would have liked to have seen Brice take that one.
I just
the
needed
way
2
everyone was.
points. You didn't need 3. That's just the thing I don't understand about it.
I mean, I'd have to go revisit a little bit, see what maybe Brice saw in it. And I understand that there's a trust factor there that he sees Connor, in practices where he fills up 10 in a row and you're like, he's going to make it. And so there is something to be said for that. But yeah, that was disappointing. And then they actually got an amazing look from Berke. Not the guy who's going to make a lot of them, but it was as good as you could hope considering there's 2.5 seconds left.
2.7 seconds.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were those chances, but that's where it's a frustrating game because if one guy, I guess you could say Sam Hoiberg kind of did this, he hit his 2 shots and got 6. But if just one of the other guys, if Gary, a Siege, and if somebody gives you like 8 points, yeah, Morgan had a tough game.
Worst game of his Big Ten season by far. And it came at a time where you couldn't afford to have it. It was almost unplayable at one point.
They had that possession too. It was like 7 or 8 minutes left where I think it was Morgan rifled a pass for Gary, and it was just had like 100 miles an hour on it and went out of bounds. And you were watching those happen, and you're like, that's gonna cost them, like like the Morgan one where he couldn't get the and one. I was like, that's gonna hurt later. A big play was a foul with 2.5 seconds. Whether you thought it was a good call, they put Michigan in the line with 2.5 seconds. And
it was a horrible call
in the first half.
It was a horrible call.
Yeah,
he was falling down, and they bailed him out. I don't think the officials hurt Nebraska that badly on Monday night, but that was 2 free points that absolutely didn't need to happen. And the only reason that foul goes to the free throw line, because for whatever reason, Connor Essegian gets truck sticked, and they called a foul on him. There's nowhere for him to go. He got run over, and it was a blocking foul. So that one foul leads to Nebraska having 6. The guy gets fouled right before half instead of it being an inbounds play with 2.7 seconds left. He gets free throws. Neither of those should have been fouls. Now, Nebraska lost by 3. They scored 40-some points. The officials did not cost them in this game, but horrible officiating for a couple moments in that first half. Have you watched back Essegian just getting run over?
Yeah. I did. There were some.
Was it DJ Carstensen? Is that his name?
I think so, yes.
I'm very tired of seeing him and Kelly Pfeiffer. I would just, would love to see the Big Ten just bring in some different people for me to be annoyed by, because watching the same people in the same games every single year do the same stuff is just aggravating.
I will go with you and say that there were some bad calls. I don't want to go down that whole road, but I will say
they didn't lose because of officiating.
But I will say this about college basketball in general. I am beyond tired. This is in general, not about the Nebraska game specifically. The flagrant one and the review nonsense. Can we just go back to basketball as it's been for decades where, yes, if a guy trucks a guy into the first row, it's an intentional foul. You get your 2 shots. This is ridiculous what we're doing now, where we're going like, oh, you grabbed him. Like, I get that Gary kind of, you could say intentionally, like, didn't have position, but there was no harm in the foul. It's a stupid flagrant call that we did not call all of my life growing up as a flagrant foul, and now we're deciding games on it. He missed both free throws, the Michigan kid did.
They
But
stepped out of bounds on the ensuing possession.
yeah, so I guess if you're into the ball don't lie thing, there you go. But I just think the whole thing is a problem for college basketball, and I'm waiting for it to get to the NCAA tournament, and there's going to be a ridiculous call in like the Elite Eight or something where they go review something with 37 seconds left and call flagrant one after looking at it in slow motion. It's just, anyway, that's my rant on that. And it doesn't have to do with the Nebraska game. It has to do with college basketball as a whole.
I think it's a fair rant. There felt like a fair amount of reviews yesterday, including the one where they were trying to determine who the ball went out on. That seemed like it took a lot longer than necessary. And I don't know if it was just got rolled into a commercial break and everything got slowed down because of it. But when you already have a disjointed, choppy game because no one's making baskets, adding like a 5-minute review in the final 2 minutes of the basketball game does not increase the aesthetics of what you're watching.
Yeah, no question. I mean, missed opportunity. So they're 17-11, 7-10. Minnesota Saturday, Ohio State on the road Tuesday, then Iowa the next Sunday. Ohio State, by the way, is just falling off a cliff. I don't know if that's good or bad or whatever for Nebraska, but Nebraska is going to get them now with them having to save their season on Tuesday. So it's in the way I don't like that outlook from a distance, but first things first, obviously they got to beat the Gophers.
Yeah, we'll pod again sometime next week, and it's going to be a fascinating conversation because I'm guessing we'll probably do it. We can either do it Tuesday before Nebraska plays Ohio State, so we'll talk through the Minnesota game and set up all the scenarios, or if we do it after the Ohio State game where everything comes down to Iowa, that could be interesting. So next week sets up to be a very interesting week for Nebraska basketball, as they all are. When you're in the position that Nebraska wants to be in, that the fan base wants them to be in, you're on the bubble. This is what you hope for. You hope that you're further than just being on the bubble. You hope that you're solidly in. But in the absence of that, you have the opportunity to do something that hasn't happened a lot around here, and that's get to the NCAA tournament. You have the opportunity to get that first win in the NCAA tournament. It's all right out in front of them, and these next 3 games, absolutely critical. All right, BT, let's go guess a random Husker Hooper. What do you got?
Okay, I got one. He you know what?
Gervais Green.
No, that's not correct. We're talking about 03
to
06. He played like every year. Like he was always part of it. And he's a guard.
Charles Richardson.
Oh, okay. You got it.
Didn't they just like have him on the big screen last night?
Yeah, but I didn't know if you it's too easy. I wanted to talk though about, here's why I picked Charles Richardson.
The shot against Texas Tech?
Yeah, because that's one of them. Like, there's probably a number of games I could count on one hand where I've thought like Nebraska basketball just pulled that out of their butt. Like, no, like very rarely does that happen. That game's like number 1 on the list to me. And the reason why I used him, because I figured you would get him quickly, but last night's game could have been like in that company to me in a way, except it would have meant more to their postseason aspirations, which would have added to it. So that's why I picked it, because that's the one game where I always think of, like, I remember I was watching with Matthew Hansen at his apartment, and we were just like, we couldn't believe it. Like, Nebraska never wins games like that, where, you know, something just like falls in their lap and he hits the shot and all that stuff. And last night, if Connor Essegian hits that 3, it would have like been right with that to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. The amazing thing about that shot is that it just came on an inbounds play where you're just heaving it. Like, you don't have a real play drawn up because there wasn't that much time. It had to be a catch and shoot. And he's probably the last guy that you would have imagined being able to like Charles Richardson didn't hit a ton of threes in his time at Nebraska. He wasn't a big scorer. And then the other thing that comes out of that is it's probably the most memorable Doc Stadler celebration of all time, because Doc, being kind of a unique body proportion size individual, where he's, for the lack of a better description, built like Humpty Dumpty. And then he like takes his elbows down, and for those watching here on the video, thrusts his big chest out and just, wiggles back and forth. I mean, it's certainly not Tyler Hansborough after his game-winning shot, swatting the gnats out of the air, running down the court, but it's up there as far as Nebraska basketball celebrations go. I know that my friends and I in college, during rec games, if we hit a big shot, would turn to each other and do that kind of celebration. So that's why that game's always memorable to me, is the Doc celebration right after. That was like a Thursday night, 8:00 Fox Sports Midwest game. Like I remember watching that in my dorm room when that happened.
Tuesday night, 61-59 final. Now, a Texas Tech player, remember, he saved the ball like to Richardson. Like the ball was going out of bounds, and a Red Raider kind of like flipped it back in, like kind of foolishly. That was Bob Knight's team, right? Wasn't Bob Knight there at the time? So there was that part of it.
Might have been his last season.
Yeah, they weren't like a great team, but it was Bob Knight on the bench, so that kind of added a layer to it. And last night I was kind of thinking about that game, not just because Charles Richardson was introduced, making it a very easy pick for you to get.
When you said 03 to 6, I was like, "Did you really gonna pick Charles Richardson?"
Well, I can be made fun of for giving you a layup there, but that's why I picked it. I was like, man, this game that parallels to that one so much. But
no, I think it works. Other than Nebraska didn't hit they
didn't make it, so it doesn't parallel at all. It's like
I wanted that so bad for Connor Essegian. I mean, you could have had just a horrible game, but if you're the guy that knocks down that three, Nebraska wins that game. Nobody remembers all the other misses. We're probably not talking about Berkey's 0 for 10. I wouldn't say it's a legacy defining moment, but it's one of those things that you're right. We would be talking about that game and that shot in a very, very unique way because of what it all meant to the big picture. And instead, we're having to talk about Nebraska needing to find two and would be beneficial to win their last 3 games in a row to get to 10-10 in conference play and probably the number 9 or 10 seed in conference play, just for the opportunity to avoid going to Dayton so we don't have to have that conversation about Nebraska's first win being in the first 4. And so there's just a lot of subtext in all of this.
If you were told right now, though, that you could take, like, Nebraska's in Dayton, that's the deal. Like, you get that or you get to risk it. What would you say?
Give me Dayton.
Yeah, exactly.
We can save that conversation for if we need to have it, and I can go more full bore on this. You're in the tournament. You have an opportunity to win the game. The rest of it's just meaningless context. I don't care if it happens 11 versus 11 for the 11 seed. I don't care if the win happens in Dayton. I don't care if the win happens in Wichita. I don't care if the win happens in Denver. You win that game, you're in the tournament. You win again. No one, like, it's just just have the opportunity to be part of the field of 68. That's what the goal is here. And then the rest of it sort of sorts itself out.
Yeah, there'll be no complaining from me. If they're in Dayton and they're in it, I'll be like, all right, at least we got that. And I mean, if they won a game in Dayton, you also know how this goes, and we don't have to go any too far with this. But like, even when they're at the Big Ten tournament and they win the first day, there's this like juice around it. Like, okay, they might go on a run. Like you can imagine that if they went to Dayton and won a game, and then like they're getting on the plane for wherever. 2 days later, the like enthusiasm, like, all right, let's do this, like, so I'm not here to besmirch Dayton at all. And if you said right now you can take your chances and see what happens, or you can just be in Dayton right away, I would say put them in Dayton, but
Yeah.
that's not the way it works.
The only complaint I have about Dayton is the logistics of getting there and getting to the next game for the fan base is hard. You'd rather have the certainty of playing in Wichita and knowing they're in Wichita or Cleveland or Raleigh or Lexington or Seattle or Providence than Dayton and something else. Because the thing that I missed out on last year that you and Bruntz were able to experience is the way this fan base came together in in Memphis for that game against, that was awesome. There is an incredible story here for whenever Nebraska wins their first tournament game, because the fan base will turn out for it wherever that game is at. And so that's the one thing that Dayton would potentially take away from it. But if it's all part of the story, it's all part of the story. And more importantly, you're part of the tournament. If you're in Dayton, it means you're not in the NIT. And if you're not in the NIT, it's a successful season. That's how I view it.
All right. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I think if they win Saturday, we need to do the podcast Tuesday to have a feel good, guarantee.
We'll commit to that.
Because
do you want to just commit to the podcast on Tuesday, no matter what?
We're going to do it Tuesday. Yeah.
We're in.
We need a win though, because we've done these after losses, and I think we've actually been pretty forgiving about this squad and hopeful, come on guys, it's there. It's right in front of you. But unfortunately they hit us with losses right before we jump on here the last few weeks.
Well, we'll see if they can bring a win Saturday against Minnesota in what has been declared a stripe out game, where certain sections are required to wear certain colors. BC will have to check and see what the press row lands in. I believe it is red for me, which is, I don't really own any red for kind of obvious reasons. So they're probably going to get neutral gray. They're probably going to get what I have on right now. This is how I attend Nebraska basketball games more often than not. So you see one gray speck inside the arena, you can know that it's me.
You're going to be like the guy who didn't wear the ribbon for the Puerto Rico parade in Seinfeld.
There it is. There's our Seinfeld reference. It's time to go.
Yep.
All right, everybody. Appreciate you listening. Check out everything we got going on. BC, plenty of coverage from last night's game at Husker247.com. Plenty of recruiting coverage as Nebraska's locking up some official visits for football. Bruntz has been on it for baseball. We got a baseball podcast. He's had Will Bolt and Cade Povich on. So that's kind of cool. Bruntz starts his baseball podcast and he gets the head coach and then a Major League Baseball pitcher on. So far, our only guest has been Kent Pavelka. We'll let you decide which has been the best of those three guests, but we might have to step our game up next year, Brian.
Sounds good.
So we'll figure that out. All right, everybody. We'll catch you next time.